Well, thanks very much, everybody, for sticking around. We heard an excellent presentation just now from Richard, answering probably lots of our questions and covering lots of the ground I think that the conference itself is trying to address. But this is our chance now to sort of start to unearth some of those issues that have been raised and sort of go into a bit more detail, but also sort of find out the perspectives of each of these members of our panel. We have about 45, 50 minutes to ask questions and to have a debate about some of these issues that have been raised both yesterday and so far today. So I'll shut up now and hand it over to our panel. And then as they've finished, if people have got questions, could you just raise your hand and one of the helpers at the back will come with a microphone so we can record this. So perhaps we'll start with Devlin, who many of you have perhaps already seen and heard. But
yeah, I probably shared too much information yesterday about myself, so as an introduction. So I'm Devlin Daley, CTO and co-founder of Canvas by Instructure.
Okay, I'm Julia Lodge. I'm a bioscientist, so I'm a user of technology in teaching, I suppose. I'm happy to share a perspective.
I'm David Franklin. I'm president of the Guild of Students, the voice of 28,001 seat.
Great.
I'm Alison Cooper. I'm from the College of Medical and Dental Sciences, and I do a lot of teaching and a lot of organising and a lot of student interaction. Sometimes I use technology and sometimes I don't, apart from this.
I'm Karl Nightingale. I'm also from the med school, and I do a fair amount of running around doing teaching, and I do a fair amount of research as well, so I have to balance my life.
I'm the same person as I was just now.
Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. So, without further ado, would anybody like to start us off with the first question? Any hands? Fantastic. We've got a hand here. There's two questions, I think, just close to the front.
Thanks. What I'd like to know is, or what I'd like the panel's perspective on, is how you translate all the good stuff that's being developed, all the technology-driven learning and teaching, to all of the staff within the university. You know, how do you get staff on board would be my question.
Fantastic. Good, thank you. Would anybody like to start? Should be totally democratic.
Karl. This came up yesterday, and I think we have to accept that there are a whole range of different folk in the university. There are early adopters who like technology and they think about their teaching and they are going to explore new things and accept the challenges of that. And then there is an awful lot of teachers that are running around like headless chickens, and that's their lives. And then there's a huge rump of people who see their jobs as researchers and they do some teaching. And so somehow, if we've got to have a policy that is going to actually convert good stuff in educational technology into something that the students actually experience, we've got to somehow get folk to talk to each other. And I don't think that's happening particularly well here. And I look at what I would like to see, which are very basic things, like clicker use and peer instruction. And I suspect most of my colleagues wouldn't know what I was talking about there. And I think that would be really nice if we could push through really basic things, and it has to come from persuasion. You have to have a local person who does a nice study and persuade them that it's good, and it has to be robust, i.e. the bullshit people have to be asked nasty questions, and you have to persuade them that it's okay. And then they need to be given a general push of what do you conclude, and hopefully the course moves forward. And I would love that if that could be our model. But that's a very long-winded, bottom-up model. And I'm not sure that that's happening very well at the moment. People talk about tipping points, but I don't see that in the med school. So there you are. That's my perspective.
Thank you. Maybe Julia, Biosciences perspective.
Yeah, I think it's probably the most important question. It doesn't just apply to technology at all. It applies to all of the things that we are all thinking about in terms of pedagogy. And how do you reach the staff who are not interested, whether it's they're not interested because they see themselves primarily as a researcher or because they've been doing it this way for blah, blah years and they're going to carry on or whatever. And I don't have an answer. Sadly, I don't think this works. This is very good for networking, but it's not very good for dissemination because the people who need to be here aren't, not for dissemination purpose anyway. And I think it is, if we can crack, I don't know what the answer is at all, but if we can go anywhere towards answering that question, then that's going to be a really big step.
Okay, anybody else?
Maybe I'll share a little bit of a different perspective. Is my role as a technologist, okay? And so when building the system, I was talking with a dean of a business school once, and so you know, at Instructure, we design our systems and then we actually validate that they're going to work before we actually write the software. And so I was talking to him about learning outcomes and backwards design and this design that we had, and we were happy with it. We said, "Isn't this wonderful? Aren't you going to love it?" And he said, that's really cool, but it's going to require more work of my faculty, and they are not doing what I've already asked them to do. So I can't in good conscience, I asked them to do more than that. So he says, you need to come up with a way that they can actually accomplish what they need to do with either no additional work or with less work. And so I think from a technology point of view is that people will use software and technology that benefits them. And so I think we need to be very deliberate in our designs. We don't use technology just because it is technology. We use the technology that is beneficial to us.
Can I jump in? I think they also just need to be persuaded that it's pedagogically appropriate, and that's also a big step. So, yeah, technology is great if it makes my life easier, but it's also got to be something to do with the students too, and do they get something out of it?
Right. David, would you on that point?
As the word student was said. Am I correct in that the question was how do you get all staff to embrace this sort of thing? Now, I don't think you're ever going to get all staff. Even now, last year, I went to a lecture theatre and there was an absolutely fantastic lecture, all delivered on an overhead projector with clear slides. And I guess to some extent you might say, well, some will be set in their ways. Now, I'll hazard a guess that by the nature of the fact that you're here, you're interested in teaching and learning and being innovative and probably technology enhancements. So I think actually there's probably a crucial role for you guys to play in championing the innovations that are going on, because you're the ones that are here that are being involved in the discussions, that understand it, that are passionate about it, that are probably not apprehensive about it. And if you can make it seem in your discussions like it's something that's easy to engage with, that it's meaningful, that it's worthwhile, it's not gimmicky, it's not PowerPoints, which you spend an hour on just doing transitions and animations, then that's going to get your buy-in from the staff. But what's really going to make it work is if it's done in a way that's effective and engaging for students, and students are responding to that with enthusiasm, because there's nothing that would motivate you more than knowing that it's working.
Perfect. Thank you. Alison?
I would agree with that. I mean, I do literally believe that this is a piece of technology and that sometimes this really is, along with one of these, the best option. And I think sometimes when we say the word technology, we forget the bits computer-assisted or computer-based or something. And actually technology is a much wider word than that. It just literally means a tool which helps do whatever the job it is that you're doing. So I think the most important thing is that people are encouraged to try and work out what is the best thing to do whatever it is that they're trying to achieve. So if they're trying to achieve a particular piece of learning with students, then what's important is to work out what the best way of doing that is for the students, also for the staff. That is, I think both of those things have to be taken in conjunction. And it is only if that process works in total that people will take this on board. At the moment, there is a slight initiative-itis here, I think, which just turns people off, which is if you're just being bombarded continuously with you must do this, you must do that, you must do the other, you just think, oh, do you know what? I'll ignore it all. And that is at the risk of actually missing something that's really very important. we make quite a lot of the fact that students are individuals, and as individual learners we should give them the opportunities to learn in the way that's best for them. I think the opposite is true as well, which is as a deliverer, you're also an individual. And somebody who can make one particular way of delivering something in a highly technological way really very effective may not be something that somebody else can do. So to some extent, we have to take the students, we have to take the staff, we have to take what we have, and we have to make the best of that. And I think if you make the best of that, then people will see that. And you're right, it's very obvious when students really engage with what you're doing, and it's very, very rewarding. And that's what we need to aim for, because if people experience that reward, then they'll repeat it. I'm a neuroscientist. I spend my life training rats to press levers for bits of food. I know what reward is like, and I can see it when I sit in front of a lecture theatre doing that too. And believe you me, it is very rewarding, and that's what we need to be aiming to do, is to get that reward for us, for the students. Everybody wins.
Fantastic, thank you. Richard?
I'm tempted to sort of leave this to you guys, as this is a question about Birmingham. But just the obvious thing to say is that this question isn't really anything to do with technology at all. It's to do with the fact that we succeed or not in our careers for criteria that are mainly other than teaching. And until we sort out the balance of our activities and, to use a neuroscientific term, reward people for what we think is important, we're not going to solve the problem.
Absolutely. Any comments from the floor? Anybody else would like to make a point about this? Nancy?
Thank you. It's just leading on from what you've all been talking about, and especially Alison, you're talking about different types of technology being appropriate for different teachers, but also different learners. And I was just wondering, I was talking to somebody recently, I think in the med school, about even if you're doing what looks like a very dull lecture, it can actually be more effective in terms of what the students learn from, in terms of the content. So how do you think we can actually assess whether the WYSI technology enhanced learning actually has a better, impact on student outputs, and whether on, which one's better, basically, for them passing exams?
Mm-hmm. I think that's a critical answer, and I think the answer is we don't know, and we can never know. So you can say, well, if we do this in two different ways, does one way mean that the students do pass the exams more? But then that means that all we're interested in is getting students to pass exams. Now, I teach a lot of medical students. My test is, if I'm on a trolley in the corridor and I see one of these looking at me, will I be happy or will I get better very suddenly? And you're never going to know that for some years. So actually, it's a long-term process, and I don't know that we yet have the evaluative tools to actually be able to do that, and to be able to get individuals to reflect back, perhaps, on their own experiences. I mean, I think probably all of us can think back and think, the classic, whatever it was, lecture, practical, something or other from our own educational experience, which is still the thing that lives long in your memory. Well, if you can work out why that one is there, but maybe the lecture or the practical or whatever it was that was there the hour before is not the thing that you remember, then that is what's going to tell you about what is effective and what isn't. But that's a really hard thing to do. And I honestly don't know how we evaluate the effectiveness of any of this.
Anybody else want to comment on that?
Yeah, I do have one comment. I think this example is a great one, actually. You have medical students who learn a lot of stuff, and I assume you assess a lot of stuff, but the thing you really care about most, we can't assess. And perhaps it's even very difficult to teach. So there's a glimmer of hope in this direction, which is this huge move that I guess many people have heard about, called learning analytics, which is a really substantial move in the world to use artificial intelligence techniques to mine the data that is coming along for free. I mean, as soon as you have anybody interacting with a computer, that data is available for analysis. And I think we're just at the very beginning. So what it means is that we don't have to only measure the things that are easy to measure anymore. We can measure things that are much more difficult. And I think we're just at the outset of that. And in 10 years' time, we'll look back and say, we were like the drunk looking for the £5 note under the lamppost. You know this story? The guy's looking on the ground for a £5 note. He said, what are you looking for? He says, a £5 note. He said, where did you lose it? He said, over there. He said, well, why are you looking over here? He said, well, there's no light over there. And I think we're a little bit in that situation. You want to know whether you'd be happy to see this bloke on you're lying on a trolley. But we don't really have good ways yet of assessing that. But we might.
Karl?
Well, my perspective is I've just spent a long time, 2 to 3 years, looking at how lecture recording, so trying to evaluate that in the med school. And so there's clearly a lecture recording is something that a lot of folk have opinions on. I think some are positive, some are not. And there are all sorts of reasons. And I think you have to look at that. It's a new technology. And so you have to... So my perspective is always, this looks like it could be something I could incorporate into my teaching. I listen to someone who I respect telling me that this is a good idea. I usually listen to other people in the audience that are moaning and making miserable comments about, well, this might not work because of this and this and this. And usually they're very experienced people, and usually those points are valid. And so I did a PG Cert, and I had time to do a study, and I enjoyed it. And it took a long time. And I found out that students use it, and I found out that there's good and bad aspects of it. And that's basically what I got out of my study. And it also was one of the best studies on the planet. And the point is that that's because the evidence base for lecture recording being a support of learning in students is poor to basically abysmal. You know, so I'm a natural scientist and I do experiments, and the way we think is that you look at data and you criticize it and you're unpleasant to whoever's presenting the hypothesis. That's how we work, and that I come over as negative, but that's my training. And so I look at educational technology and educational research in that way of thinking. I look at it and I look for the problems. And I'm not convinced by very much of the educational research on lecture recording. So I thought I could do better. And I published well, so someone else thinks I can do better. But whether what I did is informative or useful for my colleagues is up to them to decide. And I think all I can do is put what I think is robust evidence in front of them and say, this is what I found, it's up to you now. And I would like that to be the model. So somebody does an even-handed, nice study that's a bit robust and that would withstand the sort of miserablest criticisms of your colleagues. And that takes time.
Okay, you're done.
Just to sort of go back to the original premise of the question, which was, how do we know it's effective for students, right? And I mean, excuse me for not being sort of clued up on pedagogy and all that sort of thing, but you've got 28,000 out there. Why don't you go and ask them? And, yeah, but...
Because if you ask students whether Smarties are good, you know, if I gave out Smarties in my lectures, I'd be popular. It's not good enough. It's not good enough that students like it. It's got to be more than that. No. And that's the basis of a lot of the educational research, is that the students like it because I'm doing something new and I'm all enthusiastic and keen, and the students like it because they've never done it before, and they say it's great, but that's not good enough.
Well, what I was going to go on to say was...
But this is how it should be, isn't it? It's how it should be.
We've got, coming in the next year or so, some key and quite large investments in education technology, whether that's the new VLE, whether that's what we're pursuing in terms of MOOCs and lecture captions and things like that. And I think as an institution, perhaps we need to make a decision about the breadth of the technology that we have. You're not going to find a one-size-fits-all solution. As much as I could pretend to you that I went and trawled through for hours and hours on WebCT looking at extensive reading lists. It just didn't happen. And similarly, we were saying, I don't think you're going to find a student who's going to trawl through 6 hours a day's worth of lecture videos either. You might find one and it might be great for them, but I think you've got to weigh up what it costs versus the benefit. I agree it's an intangible benefit in terms of, is it effective? Now, I remember using voting pads in a politics lecture, and that was really cool. I don't remember what we were voting on. But what I do remember is, for example, if we have a lecture that's entirely delivered on PowerPoint, it's far more effective to have slides that have 10 words on than it is to have slides that have 100 words on. And it's that sort of thing that students can tell you.
Great, thank you. Devlin?
I guess my take on it is that I think about infrastructure. So I think about, you know, when you build a new building, you don't build a new power plant or a new water treatment plant, right? Is that you build off of a foundation and then you can build more and faster and whatnot. So I actually take a step back from measuring this effectiveness to see if we're using systems where you can actually measure already. I think, you know, when we talk about science and progressing science, and it was discussed earlier, you run experiments. And so I think you have to have a system where you can actually experiment on your teaching and experiment on the learning. And without that framework, then you would be incapable of actually progressing in it. You'd just be taking some educated guesses and hoping that it works out, because you're not actually measuring it.
That in itself is an issue, because we have appraisals. So if you take a risk and use something new in your teaching, which is a total disaster, and that gets evaluated poorly, that has a negative impact on you. So we are actually in a system currently which is averse to risk. Now, risk is the word. I mean, evolution will tell you that taking a punt on a mutation in a gene is what got us out of the swamp. But at the moment, the system in which we work here does not allow us to take a punt on a mutation in a gene, because we are being asked only to do things which are effective. And the problem is we don't know what's effective until we do it. But we're actually not given the opportunity to do that. And the difficulty is that students can be an unfortunate byproduct of that. If you do something and it really is a disaster, those students are affected negatively. So what do you do?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with that. I think how you do that is you try and minimize the scope of it. So, for example, I had a teacher in high school. He had a great idea where we would write a novel, and at the end of the course, then we would have a complete book that we had written ourselves. And it was an experiment that actually worked out well, but it buried him in work, because he read a novel every week. Right? So I think that instead of, you can experiment either on, you don't have to experiment on the entire course, is aren't we experimenting on specific activities within it? Right, so then the risk is mitigated, because even if it fails, then the rest of the course can carry it. Does that make sense? I think
yeah.
Like,
so you're balancing your risk against your benefit.
And I think
absolutely.
But
that will stop wholesale big changes. Because incremental change is one thing. So, you know, we have a system for modules and assessments and all that kind of thing. And if you say, well, we want to completely change that, then you have to change it wholesale.
Yeah, I think, well, the other way to mitigate it is when you, this is terrible, but if you've done smaller experiments that show that it has promise before you actually do it. Mm-hmm. And I think that, you know, I feel more confident in that.
Yeah.
But I do agree that sometimes you have to go wholesale, but I would rather do it wholesale predicated on, you know, some other smaller experiments that did pan out.
Mm. Julia?
I don't think I have anything particularly to add.
Okay. Thank you. Comments?
Is that possibly the role that analytics come into this? If you're doing these little experiments all across the curriculum, is there a role for analytics to play in identify those things that, you know, the big data stuff, as you were saying, Richard, the things that are difficult to measure, is that the role that analytics can play?
Don't know yet. I do think that it's a very interesting question between incremental and transformative change. And the real challenge, if we really are optimistic about the potential of technology is to find little changes that add up slowly but surely to a big change, whereas what often happens is that little changes don't really perturb the system enough to change anything. And I don't think we have good ways to think about that, actually. I don't know the answer. Lots of things I don't know the answer to.
Just make so Alison was sort of talking about personal risk. I don't quite recognise the regime that you're describing, so perhaps it's med school specific. But if you did want to do something that was transformative, then you do it not just in a corner somewhere, but you get your department on board so that they know that you're taking a risk and they agree with you that you can take the risk. And then I don't think it would affect your promotion prospects or...
No, I'm also worried about the risk to the students. I mean, it's the risk to
both
parties.
Risk to students, yes.
So
but you were talking
the risk to both parties
about appraisal and things. And I'm not being flippant about risk to students either. And I think your comments about the incremental approach, which is actually what we mostly do. We say, right, well, I'll try a bit of this in this module, and then if it seems to work there, then you sort of make it bigger as appropriate. But you seem to be talking about a personal risk to the
Well, there's a cultural
which...
change, I think. If you're trying to institute a cultural change, so if you want students to engage more in their learning and be more independent, then you have to stop spoon-feeding them. But if you do that in one module out of 10, you don't stand a cat's chance. You would need to do it across all of those modules because it has to be a cultural change. And that's not something that usually as an individual you can affect for a start. But it also does have a big risk for students who are coming expecting one culture and get another. And I don't know how to manage that process.
But as an institution, how do we build upon these sort of successes that happen sort of in small ways and are presented at these conferences, and then people go back to their departments and carry on doing that thing that might sort of give them great opportunities for promotion, but then the university as a whole doesn't capitalise on that investment and that risk. So are there any sort of bigger scale ways that we can actually sort of take these from the small to the large without having to reinvent the wheel in every department?
I don't know.
No, I'm still looking.
That dissemination question is a very difficult one. And I just think there are some people that are unreachable, and I actually think it's got to be incremental. Academics, the herding cats analogy, they don't take well to being told we're doing it this way. And in fact, one of the strengths of a university is the variation that in a week, I don't know, as a student in a week you get taught in all sorts of different ways by all sorts of different people. And because students vary, and some of those things will work for some students and others won't, I think that's probably quite a good approach. We're not ever, I hope, going to ask everybody to do everything the same way. Even if the subject matter allowed it, the personality of the lecturer, the particular group of students that you're talking to. So, variety, incremental, maybe we won't get there fast, but we'll get there.
Good, thank you. Can I perhaps sort of open it up for another question? Alison.
Thank you. I'm not an early adopter. What's the university doing to structurally support people like myself to be creative in how teaching materials are presented? I mean, is there an investment in people like yourself, John, and people who work in your team to support people like myself who are unlikely to go out and find out for themselves how to do these things? And secondly, the structure of the university. I've been involved in writing several new programs. The structure asks us how many contact hours we have, for instance, when we submit a new module for validation. We're asked how many teaching hours we have in terms of our annual appraisals, how many student contact. How is the university structurally adjusting to change in how we deliver? So it's two questions, really. But
it's a good point. Very good questions. And I'm trying to stay neutral here, which is killing me.
Well, actually...
As anybody who knows me. But I will invite any of our panel to maybe comment on that and see how we are sort of trying to sort of take that aspect of technology-enhanced learning and reward people in more meaningful ways and recognise it. I think we started to sort of see it in our sort of resource allocation model a few years ago, but that sort of changed again. So is there anything that people know about and good ways that we can actually make this better? Richard?
I mentioned in my talk the learning designer of Laurillard. That is a very good attempt to try not to do everything except add to the burden that you already have. So, to put it very crudely, imagine filling in the form for a new module, and you need to know the number of contact hours and all that kind of stuff. But in doing that, you're also speaking to a system that is making inferences about what you're doing and asking you helpful questions about what you're doing and leading you to places where you can share opinions and ideas and practices with other people doing similar things. So that's an example where the tools could help, but they don't solve the problem. The tools are never going to solve the problem by themselves, but I'm sorry it sounds like an advert, but it is actually quite thoughtfully produced, so I recommend you to take a look.
Okay. Any other comments from the panel? There was a scheme in the university, I should say, called DIBBLE, Designer for Inquiry-Based Blended Learning, and that was a way of trying to encourage staff to come together in this sort of way, share their ideas around sort of teaching and build new designs for their programs or their modules, which could embrace technology. It didn't have to. And there's people in the audience who were involved in that scheme, but it didn't go any further. Quite sad, and members of the panel have been on it and have probably used that scheme to sort of change some of the things they did. So it's another example of something that sort of started small but never really blossomed.
But what Richard's talking about is not something that you have to sign up to or be part of, but something which comes along when you have to fill out that bloody paperwork for a new module, which is, you know, just restrictive. It's just, at the moment, a form you fill out. But if it were interactive, and if it did say, you know, have you thought about assessments of this kind, or here's somebody you could contact to talk about, if it were actually part of the job you had to do anyway, rather than something separate, I can see, you know, wouldn't it be nice if you got a good idea when you're filling out that form?
Somebody to write it for you. Yeah, of course.
So technologies work especially well when you don't notice them. And I think you put your finger on the potential. And this is the first of, there are going to be lots of systems like this, and some of them are going to be good and some of them are going to be unhelpful. But the idea that this is something you have to be doing anyway, and that you can do it more effectively in a way that helps you, is probably enough of an incremental change. And then, once it becomes, I mean, the process by which something goes viral and becomes the accepted way to do things is not well understood. But I could imagine a system like that, you know, becoming widespread, provided it didn't put extra burden on people.
Yep. Sue?
I want to pick up on something that was said earlier about the flexibility of the technology. And I wonder, having listened to some of the things that have been going on so far in the conference and the predominance of reference to a certain manufacturer, I wonder what people feel about how flexible the university allows us to be in our technology use, and how helpful it is in some of the things that we hear about things that are going to get locked down. So I wonder if people had an opinion on that.
Not me. Anybody? Devlin, maybe as a neutral.
Okay. I'll be in the middle. I think the flexibility of software in general is that we've had enough iterations with software to know what kind of works and what makes good flexible software. And so it ends up being actually simpler software and software made up of smaller components. There's an expression that no man is an island, and neither should any software system be, right? I just did that. Software is a man. I just did it. Okay. You know, with that, I think, you know, I was talking earlier about the foundation piece, you know, and I think that specifically Avili can be that foundation place for the flexibility. And so hopefully it doesn't make me unpopular, but Canvas actually is very, very flexible, but it is up to like how much flexibility is allowed and whatnot. That's a people problem and not something that technology can solve. So Canvas just actually makes it very, very flexible, and it puts a lot of the decisions up to the individual instructor. So for example, there are these extensions to the system, and these used to be called building blocks. Is that how you guys know them over here? Yeah. We've actually gone to a different model, which is more of a plug-out model, where we just talk to another system, but we allow that to be installed by any person in the system. So as a teacher, you can actually integrate something in with your class without asking anyone else's permission, if they allow that. Okay. Likewise, even students can actually install their own applications that would then access the system, actually even pull out the content from all their courses and do something meaningful with it. And so we're hoping that this is actually going to create a rich environment where there can be greater experimentation, where other applications can come in and do interesting things without having to build the entire system. Is just to make, instead of everyone doing the same thing from scratch over and over, is that they can do it in their own respective spheres. So I'm sorry that I think flexibility is empowering, and empowering software is good software to use. But then it is up to kind of the culture and the different decisions on each campus.
Good. Anybody else want to comment?
Yeah, I think that's a big issue. Considering that I can't even put a new piece of software on my own desktop PC without putting in a call which takes 2 to 3 weeks to get answered, it's a big issue, because if I can't make it work on my PC, there's no way I'm going to do this with 400 students, because it's not tested. It's risky. So I think what we end up doing with any piece of software that we have, if we're reliant on software as part of our technology, then we need to make sure that the individuals who are using it have the resource support, which comes back to your point about the resources and the level of support that you get. I'm a fully trained behavioural neuropharmacologist, and I have educational qualifications. I'm now looking at thinking I need a degree in IT as well. And I'm not sure that I have the time or indeed the necessary interest to actually be able to do that. And so one of the most important things, I think, is that we get good quality support in the doing of it. I don't need people telling me about the educational benefits of giving student feedback. I don't need them telling me about how the brain works. What I do need is good quality advice on what is the best piece of software to use in order to take this, my idea of converting this lecture into this activity. What is the best piece of software that I can get that will allow me to do that, that will work with whatever our current internal software systems are? And I think there's a big hole in that currently in university provision, which I think puts people off who are not early adopters, and I think puts people off who would like to do it, who get hugely frustrated, that will be me, and stop. I have created and no longer use more pieces of e-learning than I still use, because they have ceased to work for one reason or another, and I cannot spend my time reinventing the wheel. So I think that's a really important point about the support we get.
Richard?
Right, I'm going to violate my rule, which is you don't tell other universities what to do, but I'm going to tell you what to do. Clear off all the technicians on the most senior committee that make these decisions and replace them by students and lecturers who care about learning and teaching. Because everywhere you go, everywhere I go, these things are being run by the technicians for their convenience, under the heading of security and pornography and all kinds of other things. But what really matters, which is teaching and learning and using this technology that's so potentially powerful, is forgotten. And I've lost track of the number of stories I've heard in my own university of discs being wiped, students being barred. I mean, it's just ridiculous. You don't need a degree in IT, you just need to get rid of the technicians.
There we go. Anybody else want to comment?
My only other comment there is, and maybe Richard can help with this, is that I think that a lot of the law has not caught up with some of the technologies. And so the reason that some of the technicians are running the show is it's because the law hasn't caught up, and that there are risks to the university by not having done that. So I think it's a reactionary to it.
Yes. Joking apart, it is understandable that we're in this phase of denial about the potential, and it happens with TV, and it happens with any technology of this kind. But we have to sort it out. Otherwise, we're going to spend more and more money on more and more potentially powerful technology, doing more and more interesting things that nobody can access. Yeah. There is one little glimmer of hope, actually, and I do take the point that somebody there made about the well-known manufacturer that I advertised. It doesn't fill me with joy that you can't get into that system. But the one glimmer of hope is that more and more people are writing their software to run across the web. Yeah. And that circumvents, you can do anything you like if it runs on the web and you have a great web connection. So there isn't any downloading and there isn't any installation. And that kind of helps. Mind you, in schools when people did that, they just denied access to the web. So.
Just had a comment for our 2,000 student representatives there, or 20,000, however many you are. This talk of many systems and experimentation, what does that feel like for a student? From each class I go to, I'm experiencing something new each time. Does that scare? Does that excite?
There's a real tension, and that's between going to a university that feels like it's cutting edge, like it's ahead of the curve, and is doing some really exciting things. And that tension is against being a hamster, or a guinea pig, I should say, and feeling like your education, your ultimate degree classification is at risk because you're being experimented on. And that's actually quite difficult, which is, my previous comment of we're investing in all these things, and undoubtedly there are people who, at a senior level, will look at these things and say, these are really good ideas, these are really exciting, innovative, got lots of functions and things to do, but we need to have a serious think about whether we can do it all in one go. Because I do get the sense in some respects we're trying to run before we're walking.
Let's have something to lift the mood to finish. Thank you.
Because, as I kind of said, I can't remember if I said it here, but one of the reasons for creating camps was because I was frustrated as a student. And so, and then I was talking about member software. It shouldn't be an island unto itself. Because I think that actually every one of us has a set of software that is our own personal tool set. I love Gmail, like you would not believe. You will, and I have turned on all the keyboard shortcuts and I know them all by heart. And I can get Google Gmail to do just about anything, okay? And I love it, and you'll pry it from my cold dead hands, okay? But do you like Gmail? I don't know. Oh, see? But I think that's okay. I think that's all right. And so I think that with these other systems is that it's okay to have different systems as long as I can still communicate with them using my own tool set, right? If I can use my email or I can use the other applications that I like to use, then I think that can help bridge that gap. And so it's not, I have to, these 5 systems and they're completely separate. My interaction should be using the tool set that I like to use. And I think then it's not as severe.
And that's important for students as well.
Absolutely.
Think, it's not just us, but students need to be able to use the tool set or the bit of kit that they're most comfortable with. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to slightly amend what I just said, actually. Bear with me. I think there's an amount of onus on not the students, but the staff who are delivering the technology. And perhaps then those who are sort of aiding those staff in understanding the technology, because in order to mitigate against that apprehension and that feeling as though you're being experimented on, if the staff who are delivering it to you are confident, are knowledgeable, are doing it effectively, then actually I suppose you could use an unlimited number of ways of delivering education. That's the question, is are those staff confident, is it being effective, And in terms of running before you're walking, that needs to be addressed first.
Take a couple of questions, then I'm afraid we're probably going to... Oh, a couple of comments, and then perhaps we're going to have to finish.
Oh, well, I guess my question is sort of a comment at the same time. In terms of moving this sort of discussion more towards back to the students, which is interesting, what about the role of student-generated content and utilising the tools and resources that you've been speaking about in order to provide greater capital of resources and you know, to capitalise on the student body and their, you know, the whole idea of near-to-peer and peer-to-peer tuition, capitalising on the resource that is students in supporting the teaching and learning activity, but using that as a way of developing our resources.
Thanks, Pete. Matt, do we have time for quick comments on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm holding back a lump, so you're going to leave
Okay.
Go on.
Go on. Anybody want to comment on that? Student-generated content, the value of it?
I'll just tell you an interesting story, which is I'm wandering around a lecture theatre. Well, it might not be interesting. Wandering around a lecture theatre during a revision session, I saw a student who had a kind of condensed version of my lectures. So I said, oh, what's that? And it turned out that a student from the previous year group had summarised all of our first year material in very succinct style and put it on the web, and a lot of the other students were accessing it. So this was done completely, you know, without spontaneously, probably for their own benefit, and then they thought, why not share it? Now, the response of staff is fascinating. Some staff have said, take that down immediately, it's my material. Other staff have gone, well, it's available all out, and what if there are mistakes in it? And so it's absolutely fascinating. I decided my attitude was, I'm not going to look at it. I haven't got time to check it, but I'm not going to tell him to take it down. So I'm not really answering your question, but I thought it was quite an interesting example of student-generated content.
It's a good reaction, typical reaction, I think. David.
We're a research-intensive university with a large community of students and staff, and you know, what's the purpose of a university if not to take lots of highly intelligent, very well-educated people and train them and support them to do things that will benefit themselves and the world around them? And I would add a caveat to actually that suggestion. I think it's an incredibly good idea to harness and utilise those students and support them, but I think also staff as well at a grassroots level. And that ties in, I think, with the previous question about sort of getting things given to you and being told that you can't be flexible. And you know, I certainly think there needs to be a serious think about ways in which those who are on the ground, those who utilise and engage with technology on a daily basis, and no doubt will have gripes about it, can be empowered in order to amend and change the technology that they use. There's been a really interesting project this year, actually, run by the Innovation Centre in the ERI, and that's supported a number of students in developing mobile phone apps and smartphone apps. And there's been a number of different things put forward, a lot of them very good. There's a bit of a competition. I think there's an internship on offer as a prize afterwards. That's a fantastic example of how, at minimal cost and minimal risk to the institution, we're supporting and utilising the fantastic resource that we've got on campus. And I think the more of that can be done, the better.
Devlin?
I think there's a lot of great potential there, but it's not been kind of shown yet, right? And so I think this is actually one where technology could help, right? So this is another, in Canvas, you can actually allow, students to change your course content, and it'll track the change history of that content. So you have to turn it on, okay? It's not on by default, okay? Don't freak out. Okay, but yeah, I think there's a lot of potential, but it needs to be used very judiciously. But when you want to experiment with it, then it should be very easy to do so, right? Because you shouldn't have to like wrestle with the tool for forever. You should be, let's try it out and see if it works.
Great. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, and I think every party needs to know what's going on, because I do get a lot of comments from students where I do less traditional activities, which is, but how do I know it's the right answer? If we've got students doing a talk on some aspect or other, and there's 4 of them are doing a talk, and I say, right, so between you've worked out how multiple sclerosis works, or whatever it is. And they'll say, but how do I know that what I found is right? Because there is a slight, the teacher has to check element to it. So I think what's very important is that all parties know whether this is a very much an interactive, a wiki type activity, or whether it is where the information is coming from, because that's what gives the students confidence. And I've had more than one student, and the number is increasing, ask me what I'm being paid for if they've got to do the work. It's an easy question to answer, because what I'm doing is facilitating them actually getting to the right answer, which actually in terms of lifelong learning is what they need to be doing, not waiting for me to hand the stuff to them on a plate. So it's actually a really important activity that they do. But I do think that the rules need to be very clearly laid out so everybody knows where they're coming from.
Any final comments from Karl and Richard? No? Okay. Well, I think that's all from us. I think we're up against the clock now, and lunch is upon us. So thank you very much. Round of applause for our panel.